Welcome to Bad Actors, the cybersecurity podcast and go-to guide for cutting-edge insights and cybersecurity solutions. I'm here with my guest, Chris Ebley, the CTO of Blackwood, an Armis partner. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, this is an exciting conversation because you guys are at the very edge of cybersecurity risk, compliance, and helping organizations really transform their digital environments. Talk to me a little bit about Blackwood and your role there.
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Technology Officer with Blackwood. I've been there coming up on just right at 14 years, so pretty decent stint.
Yeah.
Blackwood is a cybersecurity firm. We're headquartered just in Annapolis, Maryland, so just outside of DC. We cut our teeth in the U.S. public sector, and we've since kind of grown heavily into all parts of U.S. public sectors, the Department of Defense, intelligence community, civilian governments, as well as Fortune 1000, really focusing in the highly regulated spaces, things that have, really core mission focuses in cybersecurity, and it's easy enough for us to kind of complement that and expand off of that. And then for me personally, my day-to-day is twofold, right? I engage in the customer space, so I have an opportunity to be customer facing and help on those sides of things, and I'm backed by a whole team of solutions architects that are infinitely smarter than I am, which makes my job easy. And then I do set our tech go-to-market. So as far as the partnerships, the domains that we play in under cybersecurity, I like to say that cybersecurity, if I was talking about this 10, 15 years ago and saying all we did was cyber felt finite. And now saying we're a cybersecurity firm is still huge, right?
Okay.
It's a massive area. And I choose the areas, the domains within cyber that we build practice areas around. And then from there, we align that with specific technologies by concept and then really what I call uppercase vendors. So like the specific technologies that I feel have best fits there. And that enables us to scale, enables us to be opinionated and kind of be successful in regards to what our customers need. So
this is interesting because I just want to double down on what you just said about sort of specific verticals or practice areas, because collectively, I suppose, if you're not in the cyber environment, you would assume that every cybersecurity challenge is similar to individual verticals. If you're a hospital versus a airport or airline or an energy company, but obviously they're not. We know they're not. They're very, very complex environments, and over the last 12 months, it's been an incredibly turbulent environment for most organizations, regardless of sector. So, talk to me a little bit about how you approach that verticalization or industry-focused practice decisions, and why that's so critical for the journeys that customers are on.
There's a couple of like one, obviously from a business forward standpoint, focusing on institutions that have, in some capacity the most to lose, that are kind of like and again, that highly regulated space tends to become an easy focus there.
Okay.
Obviously when we think about cybersecurity as a whole, right? Like everyone's familiar with kind of your traditional CIA triad, which is focused on confidentiality first, and we're protecting data. And it's like who represents the largest shares of data in regards to, having that core mission set to protect those things. And it's easy enough for us to build those relationships there and follow suit. The other area of as far as highly regulated institutions being for us, like the energy utility space,
right,
which tends to flip that on its head. Like data is not as important there. That's not a factor for anyone listening. But the availability is the common mission critical factor. The grid has to stay up, right? So it's like you're taking a different lens and approach to that. And so those are the kind of things we key in on. The interesting intersection for us as far as how cybersecurity has evolved, and talk about like how 15 years ago saying cyber is finite, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, cybersecurity was just getting a seat at the table. It was a nuisance. People didn't want to invest in these types of things. You didn't necessarily have designated personnel for these roles, and that is rapidly accelerated, as we know. And so the other area those are picking the practice areas is things like identity as a space or app development as a space, where there's a huge cybersecurity narrative now, where identity was historically probably Windows Systems Administrator, because that's where Active Directory lived, and no one thought about that from cyber at all, minus passwords, right? And that was kind of the extent of it. So those are the two things that really drive like where we lean in and why we lean in. And then the U.S. public sector in general, representing like a huge mission set and a totally diverse mission set, and a lot of kind of the pieces that come with that. And you'll have, pieces of the Department of Defense that will in and of themselves represent everything we just talked about in terms of medical institutions and hospitals and energy utility space and everything on from there. So it tends to be kind of micro representations of all of the same things that we see at different scales.
And it's interesting, without going into the politics of obviously the latest US change in government and the different postures, I guess, between the previous administration and the current administration. I was speaking to a guest several months ago on the podcast, and they were saying the speed of decision making in our current administration with President President Trump has changed in the cyberspace. We had an AI directive not so long ago, a couple of weeks ago. Do you see that affecting the decision making that is happening across the federal agencies? And do you think that poses a problem in terms of budget and funding? And how do you solve that with some of the customers that you're dealing with today?
Yeah, I mean, so to work backwards to that, right? So budget and funding for sure, right? Because I think like the government historically thinks and acts in cycles that are not necessarily, akin or flexible the way they need to be with the modern digital era. And I think the current administration, to their credit, is trying to focus on that. Like they are trying to do their best to accelerate, whether it be buying vehicles or mechanisms or way to kind of get access to technology or to enable, like, while still promoting cybersecurity narratives, to get out from underneath some of like the bloat that historically exists with like
Right.
traditional process that we associate with the federal government, almost in a tongue-in-cheek fashion. So that focus is great. The nice thing to the political comment you made there is that cybersecurity is one of the I think truly one of the few bipartisan domains.
Right.
Like I
Yeah,
think there is
you're
kind of
right.
like there is a common interest in that sense and things, and so that does tend to make our job very easy.
Of
It's
course.
very rare. You're not going to find a party that's like, hey, we disagree. Like this is not
True.
like it's not important in that capacity. And so having those focus on that side is huge, and we do like to lean in on that side. And so with the current administration, with previous administrations, there has been a rapid acceleration in regards to guidance tied to cybersecurity and embracing of certain technologies that you brought up, AI. We think about like modernization within the cloud, requirements in the cloud. I mean, everything that you see within, if people think Fed, they think FedRAMP, and you think about
Yeah.
like, it's like, and it has its pros and cons to it as we know, but it still represents the U.S. government trying to modernize and lean into spaces and trying to provide guidance to the private sector to say, hey, this is what this
This
is
is what
this
you
is where our
required.
comfort zone is, right?
Of
Like this is
course.
where we want to be as far as to be able to adopt you guys, and we want to be able to adopt your technology.
Yes.
So,
And I think it also, sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but it also gives you, it gives the government some sort of focus on the plethora of vendors there are out there. And if you have invested into the technology, if you are, on the path of FedRAMP, then you know that you've sort of ticked that mainline criteria, as you said. Yeah.
no, I mean, to your point, yeah, it absolutely. It validates that those institutions are equally vested in the space and want to support the public sector, because that is another area that I think has become a little bit more mainstream as we see technology start to exist. Companies that were born in the cloud, and especially cybersecurity companies and stuff like that. I think having the public sector as a forward focus is a newer concept. Where
Yeah.
historically
You're
speaking,
right.
like there were a lot of institutions in tech where they had to go to their own boards and
Mm,
most likely travel out to the West Coast and have to convince them as to why they should care about the public sector,
of course.
and put in those investments there. So yeah, I think like when you look at the other side of that is like institutions that are able to fly that flag and say, hey, yeah, we've matched these certification requirements and stuff like that. It provides confidence on levels that go beyond just the technical controls,
Yeah.
right? So
And it's interesting. Before we move on, I want to talk about sort of the range of very public announcements or like things that have been uncovered. We know from a nation state geopolitical environment, it's been very, very challenging for the last couple of months. But we now know, and we've uncovered that, bad actors, China has been infiltrated the US, telecommunications networks for a long time. We had all those typhoon issues last year. This has been a known problem a known problem for the last year or so, but they've been in the infrastructure for decades.
yeah.
In your capacity and also the length of tenure that you've spent in cybersecurity, do you think this is the tip of the iceberg, or do you think we have got a long way to go to uncover what has been going on in that sort of environment?
I think inherently when you look at just like and tech is a very fast evolving and highly connected, representation of what's always been, you play in the battlefield that's existing in front of you. And
Right.
so like everyone, like historically prior to tech, everyone's exploiting different methods of communication or different methods of espionage and things of that fashion. It's like, and so you'd be dumb to assume that people aren't going to continue to do that.
Yeah.
And barring me being super wrong about this, I don't think we're going to have less connections, less connected devices, less, methodologies and abilities to employ technology and kind of ways that we're trying to capitalize on that for, for our nation's security advantages, for business advantages, for advantages of humanity and all the kind of stuff that kind of comes with that. I think all those things tend to be trending in a way that it is a growth narrative, right?
Yeah.
And so in turn, yeah, I think the cybersecurity piece comes with that because there's always what's in for me, what's available to exploit, what is the personal gain, what can I do with this information, what can I do if I can limit other institutions and other countries or whatever's ability to be successful there. It's the same. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think tip of the iceberg, I think is almost like an interesting way
It's
to it's an
moving.
interesting way to look at it. Yeah, it's just kind of like we're just looking at just like the most ridiculous, like accelerated curve,
Yeah.
right? I think that's
I
it.
agree. I think it never ends, right?
Yeah.
In your role, I think you are probably exposed to so many different paths that every single organization goes along, and what they're trying to do from their own sort of journey perspective. Do you think things have changed over the last 10 years in terms of education? A lot of people have put an investment into trying to understand the narrative much more broadly. I mean, the whole everybody and their dog now knows about cybersecurity risks, even if they don't understand the technology behind it, is a mainstream talking point for every element of society nowadays. So I suppose you could be you could assume the education element has changed, but I hear from all my guests, and we talk about this a lot at Armis, we're still doing some of the fundamentals of explaining policy, of explaining the approach that they need to take. So what do you think has changed in the last sort of 5, 10 years or so in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, cybersecurity is a full-time job, right?
Yes,
And
or
so,
more so.
to conversations we were having earlier, it's like you can have an opinion on a Tuesday, and that can be really wrong on Wednesday. And so,
Yeah.
even as you're educating people where it's not their day job,
Mm,
right? Like you are educating boards, or you're educating leadership, or you're educating executives, or bureaucrats, or whatever it is, who are going to make decisions around these things, but it is not their core day job, and they're
right.
trying their best to keep like the consideration around cyber as part of that, but when that changes the next day and the next day and the next day, it
Mm,
is really hard to stay ahead of those things. So I do think from a base understanding of the importance of cybersecurity, I think there's absolute buy-in, right? I think that is there on that side. I think to that same end, every time you introduce something new, we don't have a single customer right now that's not trying to at least explore the idea of AI and the different
yeah.
presentations of AI. And, do we build our own LLM? Do we take advantage of other LLMs? Do we are there use cases for agentic, artificial intelligence within our institutions to be able to enable customer facing products or to enable our own internal processes? And how can we make things leaner and faster and all that stuff? And it's like, that's the next thing. And
Mm,
tomorrow there'll be something else. And
yeah.
with all those things comes massive cybersecurity implications. And sometimes it's just accelerations of considerations that have already existed. Sometimes it's truly net new. But
Hmm.
if AI came to exist on a Wednesday and the last time you educated someone was Tuesday, like they are
It's
unarmed.
changed again.
But the reality is that what does still hold true, where I live and breathe cybersecurity,
Mm,
but for most institutions, cybersecurity is overhead. It is
mm,
overhead. It is a necessary evil. It is an investment center that has to be so that the business can continue to flourish. But cybersecurity is seldom the business,
right.
right? We're kind of in a unique area where it's both, right? Like, and so
Hmm.
it's all in some capacity it's easy, and then it's easy to look at other people and be like, I don't understand how they don't get this. And it's like, well, because they're trying to run a hospital,
Yes.
or what I mean, they're
Their
trying to,
specialism is
they're trying to
somewhere
figure out a
else.
cure for cancer somewhere or something
Yeah.
like that. It's like they're not worried about this, right?
No.
So,
But it's
yeah,
interesting because what you said earlier about the sort of role that an individual within an organization would take, we've seen this sort of massive change of the role of the CISO, and you're a CTO, and there sort of seems to be, that sort of natural evolution of the two working more hand in hand. But you're also looking at CEO and board making decisions on budgets, on compliance, regulation requirements, and to your point, they don't necessarily have all the information that the living, breathing CTO or CISO knows. So do you see as they're coming together a little bit more, or do you think they're palming off as this is still your problem, fix it for me, I need to run the business, I need to run the hospital? Do you think that's changed much?
no, I mean, I do think there's a lot of collaboration there. And I think
Okay.
there's definitely a lot of recognition of where the expertise has to come from. And look, don't get me wrong, in some capacity, it's like if you can, everything's about risk, right? And at a human level, if I can point to the next person over on the board or the next C person and be like, hey, I'm
Yeah.
happy to defer to this person, and everyone hears that they're making the decision, not me. It's like, you've moved to risk. So I think there's probably some wins there just the same. I think for like the evolution of the CISO is interesting because that is a position that it's always more. And so I
Mm,
think what's been interesting is that there's historically an area that's built into policy and just the understanding of risk and kind of being able to then look at that from a business perspective and where do we invest and how do we mitigate, to a massive surge of technology, right?
mm,
Like we've seen, like there's 3,000+ unique cybersecurity vendors in the world today. So it's
yeah.
like you get this ability to take advantage of a lot
Mm,
of this technology, but at the same time, it represents its own burden. So I think there's definitely like a convergence of these things and trying to
mm,
understand and work alongside parts of the business that are trying to accelerate the use of technology and see kind of
right.
like selfishly how can those things be employed for cybersecurity? How
Hmm.
can I keep my finger on the pulse of things that are being employed that might represent risk and potentially have a say? I think there's a lot of consolidation there, which has been refreshing.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, to that end, it's like, you know, a lot of the areas and a lot of the core missions, like it is the business first. The business has to operate, whether that's for, availability or for revenues or whatever it is. And so you can have all the understanding in the world and you can have an entire board that agrees that there's a direction you need to go, but facilitating that and the logistics of facilitation
Yeah.
are never going to be as fast as the decision, right?
Yeah, I think you spot on, and it's interesting. I was speaking to someone earlier this morning actually about sort of the cyber insurance game and like how many policies they want to put in place to sort of secure some of that risk, and actually many organisations are struggling to sort of put some guardrails into like this would be the policy of defence for cyber insurance if you were to be hacked because where's the end point? Where's the starting point? It's so diverse as a subject matter that I think there's still a lot of conversations need to happen around cyber insurance policy and risk compliance and management. Do you see that going to be something that will be focused on next year, do you think, as we try and regulate some of the outcomes of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, like to tell like a quick story, I think like, as far as how that's evolved, and I won't name names, but we had a
No.
customer very early on where we met with their CISO, and his entire risk strategy was based off of I will make investments only where effectively my cybersecurity insurance won't just provide the coverage, right? Like a function, and that was like 100% the strategy, right? Like,
Wow.
and it's like, and
Okay.
obviously, like, look, fast forward, like you're not going to find anyone who's taking that
No.
approach to things, but at the time, there was like, listen, it was a monetary business oriented decision. If insurance is going to cover the exposure, there's not going to be any additional investment, and so the juice has to be worth the squeeze, and that was the vision on that. Now, what's interesting is that you're also talking about a time where getting cybersecurity insurance was substantially easier.
Yeah.
As we see, fast forward to like the modern day, I was just reading an article I think yesterday talking about like large scale breaches and like the kind of articulation of claims and like at $300 million where insurance is paying out at 100 million, right? And so it's like you now have this interesting swap where
Yeah.
it's like insurance to the point and to their credit is holding institutions accountable for their own due
Of
diligence
course.
and making sure they're matching against controls and at
Yeah.
least doing the bare minimum there. um, Insurance is an interesting space in general because if I go outside of the world of IT and cyber insurance, I'm pretty sure insurance's job a lot of times is to not pay.
Hmm.
So when you apply that to now cybersecurity and it's like you have this whole world of controls or missing controls or I pushed an EDR to 99 of 100 laptops, but hey, we saw the 100th that didn't, and it's like where's
Yeah.
your exposure
Where's the
line
exposure?
stuff? It's like and where does that fall into like are you liable or not? And I think it's so yeah, I think cybersecurity insurance is top of mind. I think it's
Mm.
absolutely necessary. I think it's a very fast evolving space.
Mm.
Um, and it's equally interesting because it's like obviously you have the world is not new, the world of being able to look into controls and attestation to that your ISOs and your SOC 2s and all these things that say hey we do we embrace these kind of ideals and controls that go alongside them. That's not new, but being able to attest but just to insurance
Insurance
providers
process.
to be
Yeah.
able to actually achieve those outcomes and understanding that like those narratives you talk about, your ISOs and stuff like that they're not new for modern mature enterprises,
Mm.
but for SMB, for mom and pop shops and stuff like that, like
Yeah.
where do you find the ability to articulate back to insurance
Of
providers that you've
course.
matched those
That
things?
you've matched the things.
It's a
Yeah.
lot, right? It's a big space. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's top mind. I definitely think a lot of the conversations around that are going to accelerate. And look,
Mm.
at some time, just tied to any other type of insurance, like it'll be interesting to see how technology evolves, how cost of
Mm.
money evolves, and how kind of like what's the value proposition there. Yeah, I mean it's I think
We'll
that's
watch
very
this
day to day.
space.
Yeah, very
A
day to
little bit
day.
of a tangent question. It's a bit of a cheeky question. Obviously, on a slight side note, but similar note, Australian government barred organisations from paying out ransomware payments. The UK government's going down the same, my neck of the woods. We haven't seen blanket, stopping of that, and obviously for some organisations, it's actually easier for them to pay out because the damage to their business is just too, incremental. But if you see that sort of starts sweeping across more of the world, does that pose more of an issue around the cyber insurance angle? Because you've effectively got one policy saying absolutely not, you are not to do this, but then cyber insurance saying, well, we will fund you, we will support you, we will insure you to a certain degree. That's going to be an interesting balance, I think people are going to have to deal with.
I think yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of layers on that to pull out, right? And I believe I'm correct in saying at least the U.S. through the Department of Commerce does have named institutions that you are not allowed to
Ah,
pay
interesting.
ransomware to,
Okay.
and that gets into like the individual threat actor groups and stuff like that,
Right.
and same so akin to that, right? Um, the part that's interesting about that as far as it's like I believe in it's like hey listen, if you can choke off the monetary implications of something, are
Yeah.
there still the incentives there to capitalize on this? And the answer starts to become no, right? Like
Mm.
you're always in this dance of it's a cost implication to like how much does it cost the threat actor to invest in a thing, and what is the outcomes? And right now, ransomware, depending
Yeah.
on the country, depending on the institution, depending on the exposure, can be you know very, very profitable, right? And
Absolutely.
that's a real thing. Um, when you look at the other sides of this, and it's like obviously for us, we lean in on the technical sides of like harden
Mm.
against this and have your backups and please make it so you don't have to do this. But yeah, we've seen situations play out that are very interesting where it's like, yeah, legally you're not allowed to,
Yeah.
and then now you find institutions that are finding ways to
Get around that.
circumvent around that, right? And that becomes very interesting just the same. But to the insurance part, especially because of the nature of how ransomware works. I mean, how you have like the slight deviations from ransomware when you
Mm.
see some of kind of like the Ukraine conflict and some of the
Yeah.
wiper iterations that is like there is no key, there is no decrypting this. It's just this is purely for the purpose of rendering things inoperable. You still need to be able to get the business up and running the
Mm.
next day. So depending on the systems, depending on what the implications are, where the outage exists, did I just lose data or can I even turn our app back on? Can we
Right.
generate revenues? Like all of like and so I think those things have come obviously full circle back into those risk calculations
Mm.
because if it's the latter and you can't even turn the thing back on based on exposure, well then insurance kind of doesn't matter
Matter.
because a point
No.
in time check
Absolutely.
doesn't matter if you
No.
can't operate the business, right? So yeah, and I think like for me when I look at like in like the call, I'll say like kind of like looking at the idea of like the American dream, which is that anyone should be able to go out and find a bit or find a business narrative and be able to lean in on that and then build something of their own.
Hmm.
The IT burden, the cybersecurity burden, is starting to make that kind of prohibitive. It's
Hmm.
starting to make those things really difficult. So I want people to be able to do that without having to worry about like all of the other implications that come with this. But we see statistics right now that talk about ransomware is going to kill off massive amounts of companies that are
Yeah.
not going to be able to financially recover.
And the
Um,
damage to the reputation, exactly.
100%, right? And I
Mm.
think that's it. That whole space is really, really interesting. So for that, I'm definitely bullish on the idea of
Mm.
making it difficult to render payment.
Yep.
But I also think as going alongside with that can't just be that, well, ransomware is going to continue to be successful and that we're
Hmm.
not providing technical controls or guidance around this or giving institutions the ability to recover. You got to be able to play both sides of that in a big
Yeah.
way, right? Alternatively, it's selfish for me to sit there and say like, yeah, no, these people shouldn't
They
be able to
shouldn't do it.
benefit, but either way, you're still
It's
going to be
And when
out
you're
of
in it, it's
business,
very
right?
easy for other people to comment. But when you're
100%,
under the pain, it's
100%.
yeah,
Yeah,
especially if it's life threatening or
right,
criticality of a hospital,
right.
for instance. Yeah, and it's just an interesting conversation that's obviously at a very high level. Governments talking about it, but the reality of your work day to day and some of the work that we do at Armis, it's the reality doesn't necessarily match up with the ideal.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's where we are. I'm going to use the buzzword bingo and talk about AI.
sure.
It is 2025, of course, and it is interesting. So I interviewed our co-founder a couple of months ago, and he was talking very conceptually about how new threat actors are using AI to test in environments in like Sudan and Brazil, smaller local targets that maybe not being picked up, and fine tune their weaponry of AI and attacking critical infrastructure. And obviously, then once they fine tuned that, then they start looking for the big jewel. It's interesting because everyone talks about the negative of AI, and from a cybersecurity perspective, we are very, very well versed on the threat it's going to pose and bad actors. But I also want to talk about the good and the ability for technology and innovation. Some of the things that you guys do in AI, some of the things that Armis is doing with AI, in helping customers actually speed up their transformation and innovation that they're
Sure.
trying to solve. What's your personal feeling about AI, and how do you think that's going to play out over the next couple of years?
I don't think we have enough time to get into my personal feelings about
Well, we
AI.
can talk all night.
But we'll, yeah, I'll try and play. Look, I think AI is probably the most extreme representation I've ever seen in technology that happens to sit at the intersection of something that feels very dangerous and very
Mm,
promising all at the same time.
yeah,
Um, and I think not different than, I think one of the more, if I were going to give a layman example for someone who's listening not from the technology standpoint, as time's gone on and we look back at social media, we
right.
see all of these impacts that have come to be. We've seen the unfortunate pros and cons of heavily connecting people, and you
Hmm.
see narratives tied to bullying of kids that now follows you home
Yeah.
because it's tied to an app and all this kinds of stuff. Where you see the narratives tied to data collection and the profiling of the consumers of the platform, and so there's all these tiers that exist here, and AI is not different, right?
Mm,
And so there's tons of promise, but there's also tons of educational burden, not just in terms of like when you interact with an AI, what are you actually doing? What are you exposing to the AI? What is the business proposition of the institution? Because right now, those are all the primary AIs are corporately owned, right? And to the best of my understanding, they're not nonprofits, right? These people, these
Yeah.
are institutions are out there to, there's an agenda there, and that's not necessarily negative, but it's understanding what that
There's
is.
a revenue
And
to
then,
it. Yeah.
just also understanding like what the return is. If I go and ask a question of an AI, I think there's this weird inherent trust where it's like, if I go look at a social media post and I see something on, Facebook,
Mm,
people are cynical. They've learned to be cynical, but I can
yeah.
go ask ChatGPT a question and see a return, and people are like, here you go. Like, there's no
Yeah. There's no
questions asked.
filter.
There's no like questions about the sourcing. There's no like, hey, are these op-eds or these blogs
Mm,
versus like, founded in in research papers and technical dissertations and stuff like that. It's an interesting world. But
mm,
to your point, and for the sake of kind of leading on for there, I think there is, with all technology, there's promise, and there's real ways that institutions can leverage AI to their advantage. I definitely think there's a lot of use cases for AI within the cybersecurity realm specifically to help people kind of get out from underneath kind of the inundating narratives that we've seen for a long time, just tied to
mm,
like volumes, tied to like the unfortunate kind of realities of security operations, where it's just like, you know, it's not necessarily fun. It's
mm.
a nonstop ticketing, nightmare in some
Yeah.
capacity, and you're constantly having to do more every single day, and you can't get out from underneath those world of SLAs, and you're just living there. And it's like, I think there's a lot of opportunity for AI to be able to help there.
Mm,
And I do think it behooves institutions to be able to capitalize on that where it makes sense. And
hmm
I think there's, all the parts of it of security that we think about, some in the world of prevention, certainly in the detection space, and then in the response space. I think there's a lot of promise that we see
mm.
within those technologies. So I think there's good, right? There's good
Yeah.
specifically in the world that we're talking about right now, as far as like the IT and the cyberspace. And obviously there's tons of promise there, but it's super new, and
Yeah.
it's probably one of the, again, just like to finish it out, it's psychologically it's very interesting because I think humans are very smart, and this is just the first representation of something where I think it's amazing at the questions that aren't asked. It's just
Right.
like,
The
we're just going to use
guardrails are
it.
off. Let's just
Yep, we're just
go.
going to use it. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, I'm of the era of the Terminator movies, and there is no guardrails, and it's just full speed ahead, and like we learn nothing, even if it's from a film.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think as we move forward, the focus of AI is obviously the discussion at a lot of 2025 this year, and how to use AI. And as I said, the guardrails seem to be completely off.
Mhm.
Everyone's using it. It's been plowed into, whether it's go to market, content creation, or indeed speeding up R&D and innovation. But we also need to recognize that the bad actors out there are also using AI to leverage and speed up their own services. And I think the pace of technology innovation and some of the work that you guys do has what used to take maybe sort of couple of years is now taking months to create.
Sure.
We are having to combat the threats out there at a much greater to pace than we used to. We talk a lot at Armis about early warning threat detection and getting the shift of left of boom. So before the actual bad thing happens to your organization, you need to start getting into a more preventative mindset rather than a defensive posture. It's not something that everybody is talking about at the moment. They're still reacting to the data deluge of vulnerabilities and things, but it's something that we're quite keen on. And as I sort of ask you more about the Blackwood and Armis sort of engagement and relationship that we have, I wonder whether you're trying to build that sort of new thinking into some of the customer conversations you're having about doing that preventative measure. Do you see that sort of turning point in how you're discussing things with organizations?
Yeah, for sure. Right. Like,
Okay.
and I think, that was an easy thing, and sometimes you see stuff and it's just easy to agree with that kind of approach to stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for our purpose, I'll kind of like, we've never lacked the data to make decisions. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of kind of like, how can we consume information to, it's very easy retroactively. Hindsight's 2020. It's very easy to be like, oh, there it is. There's the thing. That was
Yeah.
the thing that tipped us off. And as you're kind of alluding to, kind of like your guys' approach to this, and being able to look at like, hey, how can I truly prioritize something? How can I truly look at something outside of just a massive list of CVEs or
Yeah.
something to that effect? And these narratives that we've known for a long time.
hmm
And GRC is in an interesting space in itself because I think it's incredibly important. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. Obviously, everything cybersecurity at the end of the day ends at risk, right? And so it's very prominent in those pieces. And as we add more and more applications and more systems, it just becomes very difficult to get out from underneath the narrative of how do we stay ahead of these things. And I think obviously we've seen massive flaws in the realities of traditional like kind of criticality ranking
Yeah.
systems and stuff like that. So that all holds very true. And so I think anyone would want the ability to sit there and say like, listen, I've got I'm staring at 20,000 vulnerabilities right now. It's like,
Yeah.
tell me the one. Like, tell me the one that I
What's
need
the
to
one
get
that's
out.
going
Like,
to
what's the
cause the
one?
biggest problem?
What's the one that's worth me taking down
Yeah.
systems or forcing reboots or doing, like, tell me the one that's really going to get me out from underneath this. And the reality is, like, sometimes the information's out there and the insights are out there. It's just being able to capitalize on it. It's collecting that
Mm,
data, seeing where people are starting to exploit stuff, seeing kind of where that chatter is. And there's so much insights that can be gained. However, it's almost impossible for an institution. It's impossible for Blackwood as we sit right now. Like, we can't consume that and
mm,
provide that of our own data. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it takes kind of like, that is kind of where the convergence of technologies and partnerships come
yeah.
out to able to promote a thing. And there are uniquenesses where there are certainly companies that exist within the realm of cyber that are much better at consuming data on a
Mm,
global level and being able to provide those insights back. But, I guess to land the plane, it's like, yeah, I think without a doubt, we see a huge amount of investment right now in the idea of, like, how can we just redefine what risk is?
yeah.
And how can we truly look at the idea of exploitability and accessibility beyond just, hey, I have a CV somewhere, and make educated decisions in order to actually make this less problematic for us from a
Hmm.
business standpoint. And also be able to understand the implications of, if I make a network change somewhere, how have I re-exposed myself that potentially, like, I didn't have before, and everything in between. So yeah,
Mm,
I think it's something that's definitely top of mind for a lot of people, and we're definitely leaning in on those conversations because, one of the things that's funny about cybersecurity over time is that there are certain topics that at any given time people know are so painful that they're relatively taboo. You don't want to bring it up.
mm.
And so it's like, yeah, do I, sitting 3 years ago, do I want to lean in on, it's like, hey, let's talk vulnerability management? It's like, no, probably not. Um, there's certain, that there's certain DLP, it's like 7 years ago. Do I want to talk about DLP? It's like, no, I don't. Like, I don't want to bring this up to
There's
you.
been
It's like,
evolution.
it's
People have
it's an
brought it
evolution.
forwards.
And right
Yeah.
now, I think we're in a spot where it's like, it's worth right now. I think the capabilities of institutions, I
Mm,
think the information that's available now that's being provided enables people to revisit topics. And I think
mm.
risk is certainly one of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's challenging to me though, because I think you mentioned earlier how many cybersecurity vendors there are, how many technology platforms, how many, consultants. There's so much that they're inundated with. How do you see the wood through the trees? How do you get to the core platform vendor, MSP, whatever it might be? How do you get that group of trusted advisors around you to really advocate for change within X organization and whatever path you're on? Because there's just so much noise and everyone's got a slightly different version of how to do it. And yet the CISO or the CIO or anybody in the technology realm just it's just so much.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of it all?
So just for the sake of it, like, this is something that I'm very proud of how Blackwood does,
Hmm.
right, or how it approaches this, and I'm very kind of blessed to be surrounded by an executive team that I think we're very good at how we deliver kind of and tackle that particular problem set. And we're not assessing 3,000 vendors a year, but it is in the hundreds, right? Like, it's in the
Mm,
hundreds of technologies, and to describe kind of what that world and ecosystem looks like is really interesting, because cybersecurity, not different than anything else, is a business. And so you
yeah.
have huge amounts of VC funding
Funding.
that creates its own noise and creates its own false validations to technologies that are good and technologies that are bad. and
Mm,
and so when you look at 3,000 technologies, that's not 3,000 good technologies, right? It's
yeah.
just that there's 3,000, right, or plus, right? And so from there, when we get into that, what we'd like to look at is like, okay, we'll hear the mission statements. We'll hear how technologies identify what they consider to be the problem. We'll look at the logistics and the realities of their ability to actually go solve these things to scale. How relevant the whatever their uniqueness is
Mm,
to all of our customer set. Is this something that's only solving something for the medical healthcare space, or is this something that has a more global application? And we'll look at all those types of things. And the other thing that's very interesting is we see a lot of we hear platformization right now within
yes.
tech, but is what's really consolidation, whether it's through homegrown and development of those capabilities
Hmm.
or through acquisition. And there's no right or wrong there. I think it's just all about how the end product gets delivered. But when we see those kind of narratives hold true, and so we then come back and we look at and meet with technologies. I can look at this from the sense of, like, does this technology have the ability to stand on its own? Like, is this a
Mm,
future platform? Or are you a feature? Are you going to be a
mm,
bullet point on another technology, like, list somewhere? And you look, one of the ones that always jumps out to me is CASB. I mean,
mm.
we're sitting 7, 8 years ago, and everyone's, that is the acronym, at the time, right?
Time,
And
yeah.
where it's like and now you look and it's like we have the SASE space and the SSE space,
Yes.
and CASB is a bullet point on that
Hmm.
list, right?
Mm,
Next to everything else. And so that's how those things evolve. And so through all that, how we stay ahead of that is really kind of, twofold. we keep a pretty objective, lens in regards to like what is the problem set, what do we have, and then we afford ourselves the ability to say no, which is pretty powerful, right? Like
Very.
we don't have to go say yes to everyone and sign 3,000 technology vendors, which is pretty cool on that end. And then we do a lot of due diligence, right? So there's a lot of testing that we will do with like the proofs in the pudding. If people go ahead and say that they actually, they deliver on certain technical outcomes, we'll go deploy the tech and we'll, poke and prod and validate the capability
Yeah,
sets before we ever actually really establish formal partnerships. And so, yeah, that part's really awesome. I'm fully empowered. My team's fully empowered to go do and run those cycles that way. And, it's fun. It keeps us sharp. It keeps us really opinionated on
I
tech. But
bet.
that's how we tackle
At the
that.
very edge of everything that's being developed at the
Yeah,
moment.
it's
Well, I'm
neat.
very glad Armis is on the right side of the Blackwood
Yeah, it's been
engagement. So
refreshing,
that's
right?
great.
It's refreshing. Yeah.
um, this is a personal question. If you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. But in your role, you are privy to a lot of information, privy to a lot
Sure.
of individual customers' journeys. There are certain things that are keeping you up at night in terms of the future direction of our industry and where organizations are having to tackle really big cybersecurity problems.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, right? Like, and look, the range of this varies notably. I
Mm,
mean, like it just sometimes it's just you leave a customer site, and we in a tongue-in-cheek fashion we use a joke that it's like one of the things I love about my job is that I don't work at any of my customers. And so sometimes you can come in and you can say a thing or throw a hand grenade in the room and I get to leave, right? And that
okay.
is nice, right? Like that there are truly parts of that are wonderful. Um, but in that light, yeah, I think there's facets of when you can get a chance to look behind the curtains and you
Mm,
see how internal politics and internal policy dictates the lack of outcomes in certain institutions, and then you take a step back and I take off my cybersecurity hat and sit there and say like, someone's daughter goes to school here,
yeah.
or someone, I mean, someone needs to go get, someone's going to go seek medical treatment here, or
Mm,
here's an entire community that's dependent on this company for energy or whatever the deal is. And you guys like, man, like that's the stuff that kind of keeps me up. It's like when you look at what the core mission is, what they're
agree.
providing to communities, and then like what's done on that side from a due diligence standard or lack thereof. Um, I will say it's encouraging to see that I would say for the bulk of our customers and clients that we interact with, like that is it's a very mature conversation, a maturing conversation,
Nice. Okay.
and it's just a lot. Everyone wants to do more.
Yeah.
Even some of the spaces that commoditize isn't the right word, but some of the things that have been kind of more kind of consistent energy is one of them, right? Where it's
Mm,
just like, hey, we need more, like we need more from the grid. There's different type ways that we actually originate energy and stuff like that. But the core mission kind of holds true. There's still huge amounts of M&A activity in those
yes.
spaces. There's always bringing into new. You're taking on entire whole organizations. You're doing all this absorption and adoption. And it's being able to provide for like the technical logistics around
Mm,
those types of things and facilitate that. And I think, the customers we have are incredible stewards of those missions,
yeah.
but it's a lot.
It is a
Yeah.
lot. Someone was telling me a story earlier about a airport that will remain nameless and yeah, the security breaches that were going on there. And I was like, I will never travel through that airport.
Yeah.
It's frankly terrifying.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem when it moves from the job, the work, the stuff that you can go home and be with your family, your friends, and it's just plaguing your mind. It's not an easy industry to work in for sure. And the things that we experience and help solve for our customers is not for the faint-hearted for
Sure.
sure. I want to talk about the future. So for the rest of this year and looking into next year, what are going to be the big priorities for Blackwood?
Oh man, we have a lot, right? We're always doing more, right? Like
Mm,
in that side of things. You brought up AI. Like AI is a
yeah.
huge and so for us to paint with a very broad, very simple kind of brush, right? AI represents two narratives for us. It is how do we secure AI applications as
Hmm.
customers are looking to consume them, whether they're third-party SaaS applications or grow your own, or what are the implications? And there's huge amounts of data protection and identity conversations and stuff that come with that. Or how do I use AI for security? So that's
Yeah.
huge. So as far as a space, that's top of mind, and we spend a huge amount of our time in the education space in there. I mean, that's juxtaposed against some things that kind of are huge gnarly topics, but like post quantum cryptography and like kind of the evolution of those spaces and kind of how are we advancing. You talk about like brought up nation states earlier. It's like how are we accelerating our own quantum compute against other countries and the race to Q-Day as they talk about that, and we have investments in that, and how do we provide technical abilities for our customers to weaponize, those type of architectures and stuff so they can kind of get out from underneath that. Those are core focuses. Yeah. And outside from that, it's growth. I mean, like, and for Blackwood specifically, to on a personal level, I work at a company that's amazing. I work with
Mm,
great people. And I think every single year when we sit there and look at this with the executives, with my peers, with the with the engineers and the management teams and stuff like that that I have an opportunity to interact with, I think the general thing is we just don't want to screw this up. Like
mm,
we have a good thing going, and it's like how do
I'm
we
sure you
grow? How do
won't.
we do more? How do we keep our foot on the gas? How do we, how do we continue and lean in those directions and not mess it up? Because I
Mm,
think we all enjoy it right now. We all enjoy working with each other. Like, you know what I mean? Like our
yeah.
kids play together and stuff
Yeah,
like that. And so
nice.
that part's cool, but it's just, yeah, I think those are kind of the core focuses we have. So
Yeah.
yeah, on a very personal level, I think it's a lot of that. And outside of that, it's like, yeah, it's always more. And we are in an industry where it's like, the one thing we can't do that as much as I think people like the idea of is like we can't go into a year's Blackwood and be like, hey, you know what, we're just gonna throw it back. Like we're
Mm,
comfortable where we are right now.
yeah.
We're gonna like
There is
we're gonna
no
dial back to
room for that.
70%. That's not a thing. That's not
No.
a thing. You're either good at what you do and you're leaning
Yeah.
in on the tech and you're staying ahead of these things, or you're not as relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to ask you back to join us in a future podcast, if I may, to talk about quantum, because we
Yeah.
didn't have time
Yeah.
for that today. But I'm gutted that we didn't talk about that, because that's going to be a very, very interesting
Pretty big.
conversation. So maybe in a few months, when you're a bit further down the road in that, I will see if you're willing to come back.
For sure.
Chris, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, fascinating discussion, and yeah, I hope you have a rest of the great event.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
No
Appreciate it.
worries.